Okay, so I'm Lisa Birdie. I'm going to be on Gov for Rodda's Disciples. I'm Maving, so I'll be giving both speeches.
My name is Liam Circler. I'll be going first and third on opposition from Berkeley High School.
My name is Miles Pay. I'll be going second on negation for Berkeley High School.
Good. Um,
Um, okay, if everyone's ready, I will begin in three, two, one. Just starting at top of case, we're going to define this house as a feminist in a developing nation, and our framework is going to be net benefits for the state, but with a focus on increasing feminist rights. I'd like to do a quick analysis on what causes increased abuse of women in these developing nations, and I'd like to say and point out that it's not caused by individual evil. It's not that these men have some inherent bad qualities that cause them to disproportionately um, abuse women. It's because their abuse towards women is being reinforced by structural conditions. So I'll give like a couple examples. One, men are expected to be providers, but due to like high unemployment rates or like informal like forms of labor, men are unable to kind of fulfill that role as the provider. And it's difficult for them to kind of assert control in the family household, which causes them to lean towards violence in order to assert control. Two, social norms. Because these states lack like more options for women, there's this normalization that women are expected to tolerate violence and divorce is discouraged. So women kind of stand by their husband regardless of mistreatment. And three, there is no exit option for women. These states lack options like shelters, proper like independent income, nationalized childcare, or like safe housing for women to seek help if they need it. So it's not in order to like actually solve for or like reduce the abuse of women, the prerequisite for that is actually to stop men like correct these structural issues that encourage the abuse of women, not to incarcerate them after the fact. I'd like to instead propose alternatives, which include the economic empowerment of women, so giving increasing their financial access and property rights, to increasing shelter infrastructure like safe houses, legal aid, or like emergency funds that like help women actually like leave a household if they are at risk from being mistreated by a male in their household. And three, policies that would like kind of change the norms that men are perceived as better than women. So this might include greater funding for like feminist programs in school or like for female clubs, or maybe like more like male engagement clubs where they're being taught from a young age about gender equality. And I think that from this, we like decrease like the social norms that kind of encourage this and perpetuate this. And we also correct some of the social norms that cause um, discord in the household that lead to increased abuse against women. Now, government has two contentions that we'll bring to this debate. Our first contention regards negative impacts towards the feminist movements within these states. And our first set point is just that in opposition's world, reporting becomes dangerous. So like let's just like think about like this like logically. What's going to happen in opposition's world? Maybe a woman is encouraged to report her partner and perhaps like the police arrests them. What's going to happen is because of like selective enforcement, because there is like minimal oversight from the police, and because like these police forces are like lack the same structural oversight that we see in more developed states. Um, and also like there's like issues like overcrowding that many prisons, even with additional funding, would not be able to contain all these prisoners. They're more likely to be released, which means that this husband will return angry back to their household, even if the husband is detained for a longer period of time. This creates increased economic strain and shame towards the household, which can cause this woman to be shunned. So in my second subpoint, I'm talking about like economic harms towards women. And to this we say that sure, maybe in opposition's world, there might be a slight increase of incarceration of like male abusers. But the thing is that the household income collapses because in a status quo, these developed nations lack the structures to give women like financial autonomy. So like they will not be able to find a job they likely don't have any formal education that would allow them to find skilled labor. And these states also lack the welfare systems or like employment programs or like childcare systems to help them, simultaneously find their family financially and take care of them. Additionally, we would like to say that team opposition does not correct for the social norms against women. Like in this current system, women are expected to be submissive and quiet. So what happens is when a woman like kind of like tells on her husband to the police, this creates a social stigma against her, which means she's less likely to get support from like informal support systems, like her, like, I don't know, in-laws or neighbors or just like members of her community. And the third subpoint under harms towards the feminist movement harms towards women is that the movement loses legitimacy. And this we say that like especially in a state that is like very unstable, that like the men in power are trying to like are blaming women for their like I don't know kind of ineptness. Um, it's very difficult to actually gain any proper support for these movements. But when you change it, like what's going to happen is in opposition's world, the narrative changes from inequality to breaking families apart, jailing poor men, or like imposing like westernized punishment or like excessive punishment against what's supposed to be like a normal family household, even if the woman is in the like moral right for like imprisoning her husband or like telling on her husband, it's not going to be perceived in such a way, and it's going to lose support for feminist movements in the state. Okay, second contention is harms towards the state. Our first subpoint is just a misallocation of funding. As we say, developed states have limited funding, and this means that if they want to increase funding for, I don't know, prisons and for the police, it's going to be taken away from other other systems that are considered not essential, such as like transport safety or like transportation, infrastructure, education, or shelters. So this means that in opposition's world, you're decreasing funding from institutions that actually can kind of preempt and prevent abuse from happening in the first place. Second contention is that carceral punishment can be manipulated. And this we say that like, especially in developed states, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of like legal elasticity and selective enforcement. So like even if the police gets more funding, they're not necessarily going to be reformed. This is going to lead to the powerful abusers being protected and poor men being jailed. But additionally, there's going to be expanded authority of the police, which is like controlled by the government, which means that this strengthens already inept systems that are going to like this strengthen systems, the policing systems that are going to increase like protest suppression and moral policing of women and minorities to strengthen the incentives of the state. Thank you.
Great speech. Just in terms of order, I'm going to go over some top of case. I'll go into off case, and then I'll go and give responses to gov case. And if I have time, I'll do a world-to-world analysis at the end. All right. My name is Liam Circler. My time starts now. Okay, just to give a few key observations on top of case, I think that I want to make this incredibly clear. What we're actually arguing on said opposition is that we oppose deprioritizing carceral feminism. Feminist movements in developing nations should maintain carceral approaches as central, not exclusive, yet important part of their strategic outlook, whereas in government world, government is arguing that you should deprioritize these movements and instead maybe prioritize some other things. That's the only difference between these things. We still think that feminist movements in these developing nations should absolutely prioritize other things. We just don't think that they should deprioritize carceral punishments at all for abusers in these developing nations. Okay, now that's been cleared up, I'll go into weighing. I think that government gave the weighing mechanism as a net benefit to the woman, and we mostly agree with this definition. I think that just one thing that is important to point out here is that we should absolutely weigh on net benefit in terms of safety towards these women, because safety is the prerequisite that goes before any other like part of aspect of life, like education or working or welfare. Safety is the most important thing for these women, and that is ultimately what should be weighed in this round. Which world creates more safety? Okay, now that it's dealt with on top of case, we'll jump straight into our case with our first contention being on legal accountability and how that is the foundation of women's safety. The warrant here is simple. If you protect women in countries that lack legal procedure, in developing nations where gender-based violence is under-enforced, deprioritizing carceral advocacy removes one of the only effective methods in place that a woman has to protect themselves and protect her own security. In many developing nations, domestic violence is a normal occurrence. Sexual assault goes underreported and is not as culturally frowned upon, and there's not as thorough of a punishment system as there are in developed nations. We tell you if that you get rid of this already somewhat broken system, you're going to see a large increase in abuse. We tell you that furthermore, we don't have carceral feminism advocacy in place that is or no, sorry. We tell you that police will feel less incentivized to recognize complaints if it is deprioritized by feminist movements, and there will be less advocacy against it, and there will therefore actually be an increase in what we see. We will see lower conviction rates towards dangerous criminals and a culture that is more accepting towards the physical abuse of women, which we tell you is the highest magnitude impact in this round, the safety of women. Subpoint B here is on punishment and immediate protection. We tell you that punishment towards abusers prioritizes women's safety over all else because the main priority for feminist movements is safety at the end of the day, as their health and well-being is the only factor that matters in the long run and is the prerequisite for everything else. Punishments incapacitates abusers, meaning that when you report an abuser, and I'll talk more about this on op case, but when you are on gov case, when you report an abuser and they are imprisoned, you have sought immediate safety, and at least for that small time being, you have safety. We also bring you the large impact of deterrence here, and I'll talk more about this on our second contention. But we tell you that if you have consequences in place that are very clear, you're going to have less abuse overall. We tell you that therefore, when you remove the priority of these punishments for abusers and for criminals who commit acts against women in these countries, there's going to be less deterrence overall, and there's going to be a rise in criminal acts. Our second contention is on how reform is far better than abandonment. We tell you that deprioritizing guarantees finite progress. We tell you that the fundamental flaw in all of government's arguments is that just because a system isn't absolutely perfect doesn't mean that you should just abandon it or deprioritize it. We can all acknowledge that the public health system in America has very large systemic flaws, but that does not mean by any nature that we are simply just to abandon it. The exact same that can be said here. If you stop focusing on criminal justice within these carceral punishments, there's going to be zero progress made on women's health and security. And in fact, we tell you that this is actually going to lead to more harm. We bring you an immense amount of impacts here, and the link chain is pretty clear. If you deprioritize carceral punishments within women's rights movements, there's going to be less advocacy and less progress made. It's going to set a precedent that this aspect of the movement is less important overall, and you are going to have a rise in men committing these horrible acts against these women because there's going to be less deterrence overall. And the largest impact that you can very cleanly vote side opposition here is on the deterrence and the deterrence of bodily harm, death, and dehumanization, which are the highest impacts of this round. Okay, moving to side government case. They tell you that in solve is to stop men in correct cultural issues, and they kind of go on to say that really it's not the men's fault, or they say that there's structural and systemic things that are the way society is organized right now, it leads men to do these atrocities, and it's not an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. And while we definitely agree that this is a systemic problem, we tell you that they also by saying this, government concedes that deterrence exists. We tell you that deterrence is still very important, and it still causes people not to do things. We tell you that even if there's a systemic thing that somehow makes somebody want to hurt somebody else, they are less likely to go and hurt somebody else because they know that there's going to be a punishment if they go and hurt somebody. We're not saying that by no means people don't hurt anybody. People don't hurt others in the status quo, but we tell you that getting rid of this deterrence or deprioritizing this deterrence is going to lead to much more bodily harm. This is very clear. The first contention is on negative impact of feminists. They tell you that reporting becomes dangerous and selective enforcement. Okay, I want to make something very, very clear. This is we are advocating on opposition for the status quo. We are advocating for for the same prioritization of carceral punishments as how it's currently being prioritized within the status quo within these developing countries. So there's no like way it would be there like reporting is going to become more dangerous in our world. It's just going to stay the same level of danger, And we tell you that absolutely, if you remove this deterrence, it's going to become even more dangerous when you have somebody who is abusing you or committing criminal acts. They then say that you're more likely to men are more likely to be released angry, but we tell you no. In developing countries, there's we tell you that this is non-unique compared to side government's case where you're just going to have more women be abused overall. They say that women are going to be shunned, and we say that even if you buy that some women are going to be shunned by other men and other people within the community for sending their abusive husband to prison, we tell you that this is still a far better world than having them be abused even more. They also say that there's less economic growth in our world, but we tell you this is again non-unique when compared to women's safety, which is ultimately the highest impact of this round. Their second contention is on harms towards the state. They say that developed states have less funding. And also, I want to point something out. On the top of case on their side, they list a bunch of things that they want to increase priorities towards for women's rights movements. And they say like economic welfare with women and property management and all of this stuff. This is what's actually going to cost more for states. We are not proposing any higher costs for states because we're simply just saying that we should keep the amount of carceral punishments that amount of prioritization the same. So there's no increase in cost on side opposition's world. There's only an increase when you prioritize other things that are more expensive inside government's world. I want to make that incredibly clear. Okay, overall, I want to make incredibly clear, without deterrence, you have more criminal acts being committed, you have more abuse, and you have more death and dehumanization, and those are ultimately the highest magnitude impacts of the round, and where you can very clearly vote for side opposition. That is all my time. Thank you.
Sorry, okay, great speech. I'm just gonna start a little bit on top of case. Then I'm going to rebut opposition's case, then rebut my own like normal. 8 minutes on my first word. There is one clear example of how team opposition is misinterpreting this motion, because this motion is not about implementation, it is about advocacy. So opposition has this one clear burden to prove that if feminist movements prioritize advocating for carceral feminism, that these corrupt governments and these developing nations are actually going to implement this policy. Opposition has not proved this, and I'll explain why right now this is not going to happen. One, these governments, police budgets are kind of supported by the police and prisons in developing states, they're being shaped by loyalty to certain politicians, by these patronage systems, and they don't have any strong judicial oversight. That means that prison systems are only going to be reformed if it's in the incentives of the elites that kind of fund them. So this is just not going to happen. Even if women increase advocacy for something, the people in power are not actually going to change anything. They're not going to listen to these women because it is not in their interests to support these to increase incarceration rates against men, especially because, as I'm going to say right now, these patriarchal norms still exist inside of these institutions, right? The governments are dominated by men, and they're not going to be normalizing these victim blaming attitudes because it's not in their interest. Additionally, funding does not equal reform. Opposition has this additional burden to prove that sure, maybe if you can increase funding to police forces, but the police themselves are not only corrupt, but they are misogynist. They if you give the cops more money, you make more police officers, more security cameras. That's not going to translate them into accusing other men because they are men themselves. They see themselves into other men. They themselves don't want to be accused. So just giving the system, first off, the system isn't going to get reformed because politicians don't want to reform these systems. But even if they are, the systems themselves are still corrupt. They're still anti-feminist. So giving them more money is not going to cause them to increase their like kind of countering of female abusers or like abusers of women. I'd also like to respond to their observation that feminist movements can still prioritize other things. So we're saying that like in opposition's world, you can simultaneously prioritize carceral feminism and maybe also social reform, but this is not the case. The reason for this is because developed nations have limited funds. They can't take on more debt, and they're not going to. They're not going to take on debt for the
Yeah,
sake of feminism. Sorry, what?
yeah, why?
Yeah, of course.
Wait, in developing nations right now, do feminist movements only prioritize carceral punishments, or do they also prioritize other things?
Okay, well, I'm explaining right now why it's best to promote other things. So I'm mostly just gonna explain my case while these alternatives are more effective in carceral punishment. But the fact is, first off, feminist movements, they are weak in developed nations. They themselves have limited supporters, they have limited money, limited time. So they cannot simultaneously advocate for different things because it's not going to come across as strong. They need to advocate for one thing because it's unlikely that they're going to get any support in the first place, especially from the government. So they have the greatest chance of success if they all focus on one thing. Additionally, just judge vote this on probability. You're more likely to get support from the government if you're saying, oh, I'm a feminist advocating for equality. Let's do something that helps all people and decreases like social unrest, which would inevitably help feminists, rather than doing something that explicitly harms men. This is just like it's more likely to get passed in like you're more likely to be able to pass something. But also the thing is that these alternatives and opposition's plans, they both cost money. So even if the governments were somehow receptive to both messages, social reform and increased incarceration of men, they don't have enough money to do both. So increasing funding towards the police means decreasing funding for non-essential institutions like I don't know, like their equivalent of social security or infrastructure reform or funding shelters. So that judge, it's not like one on government side or both on opposition. If you vote for opposition, you're voting for the defunding of these institutions that can help women. The reason is because if you have limited funding, using more of your funding for one thing means that you inevitably have less money to spend on something else. Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. So just quickly to do some rebuttals. Their first contention, I think they had one contention that has like pretty similar subpoints. So they say that when you remove men from a situation, it makes it more beneficial towards women. That when you remove a threat, it's better. But that's not really the case because opposition doesn't explain how we're actually reforming the system. If like even if we assume that they're going to get more funding, if the police themselves are still misogynist, if they don't like women, they're not going to arrest the men. It's not in their interest. Additionally, women are going to be afraid to do so because of getting shunned, which was conceded by team opposition. That when you get shunned, you lose your societal networks, especially in a society where you have no networks, no formal networks to begin with. Getting shunned by your in-laws, getting shunned by your neighbors for like, I don't know, shutting out your husband, that's going to discourage women from doing it. So they're even less likely to call out against their husbands in opposition's worlds. But additionally, I think the norm, like the culture is actually going to be worse in opposition's world because feminists are going to get demonized in opposition's world because like feminists are going to get painted as like anti-male extremists. That's how they're going to get painted in the media. The culture is actually going to be better in team government because feminists are going to be perceived as reformists that are trying to increase institutions that help all members of society and increase unity within the household. That's a narrative that can be accepted by men. That's a narrative that can be accepted by the governments. And people are more likely to support women. Moderates are more likely to support women in government's world. Whereas in team opposition's world, there's going to be like, that's the thing, right? Like even if there's a punishment against a man doing something, like that's not going to make men feel bad about themselves. If the men are misogynist, if that's the world that we're currently living in, them getting punished for something misogynistic isn't going to teach them that, oh, this is morally wrong. They're going to think the system is bad. They're going to have decreased trust in the government, which is going to lead to more social unrest, increased incarceration. Sorry, I'm running low on time. Increased incarceration is going to, and their inability to work is going to increase like discord within the household, which is going to lead to more hate towards women, more hate against their wives and sisters and mothers and daughters, which is going to increase harm against women. Okay. They also say just because a solution is perfect doesn't mean we should try to reform it. I totally agree with you. That's why we should be reforming our social systems. Feeding money to a corrupt system doesn't make it better. This is just like a clear way that Team Gov wins. Okay. Then just to rebuild my own case, I think I read the response to their deterrence case subpoint, but I'm gonna just kind of rebuild the importance of the shunning aspect, which they just conceded, which is just that if you are a woman and you are being shunned in your community, that's just making it that much harder for you to have independence, because women are never going to call out, even in opposition's world where there's increased funding for the police, women are never going to call out against their husbands if it means making their family destitute. So this is the prerequisite. If we want more women to report their husbands in a healthy political system, we can only do this when women actually have an alternative. Women are never going to report against their husbands if they have no means to support themselves on their own. So the prerequisite is fixing the systems themselves, giving women independence first before they can even attempt to go against their husbands. Thank you.
Great speech, great speech. Okay. My time will start on my first word. Hello, Judge. My name is Miles Pei. I'm the second speaker on the opposition side of this case, strongly arguing against the resolution that that deep that this House believes that feminist movements in developing countries should deprioritize the strategy of advocating for carceral feminism. So first of all, I want to start on the observations or the refutations that Gov makes. So the first thing that they tell us, right, a Gov observation is that even if there's advocacy, this will never pass. They tell us that more funding, one thing they don't interact with is the fact that in carceral punishment, basically what is prioritized is more years in prison and further punishment of men in society, which creates deterrence. I want to tell you that they don't interact with this to enough degree, right? And their logic for it is very flawed. So one thing I want to tell you is even in corrupt nations, feminist movements bring attention to abuse cases, right? You have social media. You create political cost when something is ignored that many people care about. Even in a developing nation, you have to understand that the women are literally 50% of the entire nation. And if everyone values it culturally and legally, it becomes a major issue that everyone wants to focus on. We also tell you that if you deprioritize the protection and deterrence of harming a woman, it becomes less of a cultural priority to the entire country as a whole. Okay, so right after this, I want to go to Gov, right? So Gov says that even if women change something, the power in the people in power aren't going to care or support them. But this is exactly the world that we are in. We advocate for changing the priority and the cultural priority that women are advocating for. We are advocating for the continuation of prioritization against abusers in the status quo, among many other things, right? So they basically argued for many arguments that we want to make very clear. Also, Gov's burden is to prove that deprioritizing will do more good than harm, while opposition must prove that deprioritizing does more harm than good. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding on Gov here, right? Op is not arguing to increase the prioritization of carceral punishment over other things. We're simply arguing that to increase the same amount of prioritization that currently exists in developing nations. We're telling you that one thing that is very important that you must understand is before anything, a woman that is fighting for their rights must prioritize their safety, which is basically cultural shifts that basically say that there's more carceral punishment if you attack a woman, or at least maintaining the prioritization they have now, as opposed to destroying it and abandoning it. My partner says this very clearly. He says that even if something is flawed right now, it doesn't mean that we should abandon the cause. Okay, we also asked the MG speaker in the POI if carceral punishments is one of many things prioritized by feminist movements in developing countries, and we do not hear a single answer, and that is because it is. And what we see right now in the status quo is we see that there are a lot of there are a lot of wrongdoings in the status quo because there are not enough punishment towards abusers that are abusing women on a daily basis. So it's important that we prioritize this type of idea. So another response I hear from a lot is basically the shunning of women. They tell you that we drop this point, and they tell you that this strongly outweighs the deterrence that comes from increasing carceral punishments. We tell you that this is a fundamental misunderstanding on the government world. We tell you that danger comes from weak enforcement. And if reporting is dangerous, that means we live in a society that where police do not take these cases seriously because number one, there are punishments that aren't long enough and not adequate enough for the actual case. Number two, we live in a cultural world that is misogynistic, as the government world says, but basically what they tell you is that we should deprioritize the safety of women because carceral punishment is actually something that protects women because it basically says that if like a woman is domestically abused or gets like attacked in some sort of way, it also doesn't have to be the partner, which they're actually talking about a lot. They basically say we should deprioritize it because it doesn't matter as much. But the safety comes before anything because the feminist movement can't run before safety is valued. And our plan values deterrence. So basically we tell you that if we live in a society that police actually take it seriously, abusers are more constrained from actually doing this because they think twice before committing a crime that actually harms a woman. All of what Av says in their explanation is for stronger enforcement. They tell us that there are problems right now, and that is something you need to value. Their entire case revolves around the idea that there are other external factors that make men want to attack women in a misogynistic society. We tell you that if there is more value on carceral punishment, then our entire society will care more about the cause. We tell you that if we advocate for something more, it becomes more of a cultural issue, and this is a fundamental misunderstanding. We also tell you that one important thing that OP doesn't want to really interact with, and we tell you that safety is greater than state convenience. The OP tells you that carceral feminism is expensive and destabilize the government because of overcrowding. We tell you the primary purpose of feminist movement is not to make government operations cheaper or simpler. If a woman's movement makes the government conform to their basic needs, such as safety, to make sure that like people aren't going unpunished and actually face deterrence for what they do, we tell you that this is a basic need, and if the government conforms to that, they are succeeding in what they're trying to do because they're basically telling a government that look, they haven't cared for women because it's like a lot of developing nations are misogynistic in itself. So the most important impact is that we actually value something that has been devalued for so long, right? So if we make women's movement have the government care for them, it is succeeding. The state exists to enforce laws and protect a citizen. If a policy strains the system but doesn't protect women, then that is failing. We tell you that it is a beneficial feature, not a flaw, like the government side tells you. We also want to tell you that this is something very important I want to weigh on is the very important idea of what the government says. The strongest points I hear from the government this entire round are based off of the shunning of women and how there will be more attacks on women because like men, I'm on the opposite our case right now and what they said. They basically tell you and refute they refute our second contention by saying that this is a misogynistic community and there's more hate if we're punishing men for misogynistic things. We completely disagree with this logic, and it is completely inverse in my opinion, right? So they basically tell you that men will get more angry because they're being punished for misogynistic things. We tell you that if women and also the government have to care about this more, as well as international communities, we tell you that it is very, very good because then the government feels more pressured to actually care about the safety of women and actually punishing people for doing bad things. That is the most important impact of this round. Deterrence, not the fear of not abandoning something that we know needs to be prioritized in the status quo. They also say a response to our first contention, which they don't interact with our second subpoint at all, about how punishment is immediate protection. They tell us that women are shunned and therefore it creates harm towards them. But we tell you that we tell you that danger is a byproduct of no action, not of advocacy. If women are shunned, but abusers face more consequences, then that means there's more protection societally for women. And that is a great thing. The motion says says that when the motion is about, I will read the motion to you right now, and it's this House believes that feminist movements in a developing country nations should deprioritize. That is what the government is telling you, but we tell you that is that is a big mistake because it leads to less protection for women. And the most important impact that you will hear in this round is deterrence and the protection of women, because that is an overarching impact because it has lasted for so long and that has been harming women for decades and upon decades in developing countries, and that needs to be prioritized among everything. Thank you, Judge. That is my time. I could be no prouder to negate the resolution.
Quick off timer. I'm just going to go line by line on Gov's case, refute all the arguments there, and then go into a voter on why you can vote affirmation. Okay, my name is still Liam Circler. My time will start. Now, first on the point of women being shunned, this is greatly outweighed by women's safety. I would rather be shunned any day of the week than hurt. This is ultimately the greatest impact of this round. And we tell you that this round is weighed on women's health and safety, which is a prerequisite before anything else. So don't weigh on women being shunned. This is like very non-unique and doesn't like it's far outweighed by the fact that women are being hurt in the far outweighed by deterrence and less women being hurt in opposition's world. So that is, just strike that from your flow. Next on rich abusers being free while poor abusers are incarcerated. You again can drop this from your flow. We are weighing on women's health and safety, so it doesn't really matter on this point. Also, we tell you that it's still better if some abusers are incarcerated rather than none, but like no matter where you stand on this issue, it doesn't matter because we're weighing towards women's health and safety, which was established in the very first speech. Next on economic growth for developing nations, again, we are weighing towards women's health and safety, which is a prerequisite for any other aspect of life, like economic prosperity. Finally, on selective enforcement, even if you buy that there's selective enforcement happening within these developing nations that are somehow like disproportionately affecting certain like groups and like not like incarcerating all those who to be incarcerated, we tell you that it's still better for abusers, for some abusers to be incarcerated, and also Gov's world doesn't solve for this at all. Okay, next I want to go over a very key point of this round that I think kind of just gets like misunderstood / confused by side government. We tell you that Gov's burden is to prove that deprioritizing will do more good than harm, while our burden is to prove that it will do more harm than good. So we are not advocating for any change in the status quo. Any impact throughout this round that side government read you on us like creating more ineffectiveness or creating like a higher economic cost for these developing nations governments is completely non-unique, because we are advocating for the amount of ineffectiveness or economic like decline of developing countries within the status quo. So there's no increase or decrease, and this simply just does not matter within this round. And we also tell you that this is far outweighed by women's health and safety, and also this is further exacerbated by side governments plan to prioritize other things over women's health and safety by not prioritizing these carceral punishments. You're going to going to create more ineffectiveness by not like prioritizing women's health and safety. You're going to then also create higher economic cost because you're changing the system. I think another thing that they read that I thought was very interesting is that they tell you that the system is, they tell you that if you deprioritize criminal punishment, there will be like other things that are great will be prioritized over that. But I think what they fundamentally don't understand is that within developing nations in the status quo, other things are prioritized alongside carceral punishment. That is one of many. That is just a central focus because women's health and safety is very important. So we're not saying that other things, we tell you this in the very first round, we are saying that women's rights groups and feminist groups in these developing nations should still come and they should still prioritize other things as they do in the status quo, because all of those things are very important. But we tell you that the ultimate impact here is that if you deprioritize these carceral punishments, then you are going to have a higher risk of criminal impact and you are going to have an increase in criminal acts. If you deprioritize criminal punishment, there will simply just be more criminal acts and committed by abusers due a decrease in deterrence overall. This is ultimately the largest impact in the round, and the best place where you can vote side opposition is on a decrease in deterrence. When you have less deterrence, less people are going to be disincentivized to commit these crimes or do things. I tell you this in the very first round. I am less incentivized to like go and hurt somebody because I know that there are punishments that are going to do it that are going to come like affect me if I go and do that. So that is ultimately the largest impact of this round. If you get rid of the deterrence, if you deprioritize deterrence, you're going to see a higher impact of death and dehumanization and harm towards women. And this is ultimately where you can vote side opposition. That is all my time. Thank you.
Okay, just a second. I will begin my time in 3, 2, 1. I first want to focus on this term deprioritize. While this might seem kind of nitpicky, when you prioritize one thing over another, it means that the social movement is going to be dedicating more time, more money, more energy, more media attention towards one aspect of our movement over another. So inherently, when you're saying that you should be prioritizing one thing over another, when what the choice is opposition cannot choose both sides. That's not the case. If you're prioritizing carceral feminism, you can't also maintain team government alternatives. Let me just repeat those right now. Economic empowerment for women, more shelter infrastructure to increase women's independence, and also norm changes through pro-gender and education and engagement programs. These cannot exist in both worlds. And I first want to explain why you should be prioritizing Gov's
Point of order,
alternatives. Sorry, what? I'm pausing my time.
Yeah, the point on like economic growth not like being like prioritized in both worlds is new within the rebuttal speech, and it shouldn't be considered by the judges.
That was in my like plan for my alternatives. I got that I brought that at top of case, my first contention, and I also brought it up second speech. Judge's discretion. These are just like alternative plans. Okay, anyways, I'm just going to continue my time. So why should you be prioritizing these alternatives over like carceral punishment? First thing is just on probability, and I also want to direct you towards this term in the motion, which is advocacy, not implementation. So judge, even if you buy that there are some benefits to increase carceral feminism or carceral punishment against men, it's probably never even going to get accepted, because as what kind of in response to, in developed nations, there are very little democratic values. There's very weak democratic institutions, and they're dominated by men. Guess what? They're dominated by the abusers. So if your advocacy is towards punishing men and the decision is being made by a man, guess what? Opposition's plan is never going to go through. This is why you should just vote immediately on Gov's alternatives. Team opposition has no responses. They say, oh, sure, we should increase financial plans for women. We should increase shelter infrastructure for women. We should increase like education for like norm changes. They have no responses to these. They have no criticisms of these, but they can't maintain both. We should focus on these better alternatives. Additionally, because they are the prerequisite, okay? Because as I'm going to say right now, team opposition has no solvency for changing the narrative against anti-feminism. When we make men are angry. That's why there's increased abuse of this women, because men are angry and they're not being taught from a young age that men and women are created equal. So when we increase these educational programs, when we decrease issues in society that cause anger in a home, that cause abuse, we just vote for Gov on prerequisite that we can prevent men from being angry in the first place and abusing their wives. Okay, I'm just gonna move on for now. And I'm gonna go on this first issue of like what solves misogyny. I'm gonna focus on deterrence for a second. There's two aspects of deterrence that we hear from opposition's case. The first thing is this like cultural issue that like when you make something illegal, men are not going to want to do it anymore because it's going to be perceived as a bad thing. And that's like not the case, because also what went and responded to is that feminists are going to get villainized for this, because if you imprison a man for doing something that is in favor of his principles, he's not going to go behind bars and realize I was in the wrong. He's going to blame his punishment on the women that put him behind bars. So if your brother was imprisoned for doing something that fulfills your own principles, you're not going to blame your brother. You're going to blame his wife. This does not change the cultural principles. What changes the cultural principles is Gov's alternatives, which it can only happen in where we focus our media attention, where we focus like Gov advocacy towards these systems that reduce aggression between men and women, that promote education, that teaches that men that sexism is wrong. Okay. Additionally, they say that men will be less likely to abuse women if there's a punishment. Like even if there is no cultural change, they're just going to be afraid of getting punished. But this assumes proper enforcement, and this is also a clear voter for government. Why? Because opposition never explains a mechanism of how increasing funding for a corrupt system is going to reform it. This is a clear vote for government because I say if a system is corrupt, if it's a corrupt institution, it does corrupt things. You give it more money, you're going to fuel its corrupt practices. Even if you increase the charge for incarceration, opposition never explains how these misogynistic police officers are actually going to uphold the law. Because in a developing country, there is limited government oversight. They're not being held as strictly to the law. There's more legal elasticity. They never explain how even if for whatever reason the men in government listen to these radical feminists, why they would actually uphold these values that go against them. So there is no going to be deterrence because opposition never proved why increasing funding for a corrupt system would actually reform it. If anything, this is a vote for gov because when we fund a corrupt system, it just makes it worse. Then on this last issue of shunning, even if you believe pro-incarceration is good, if women have no financial security because pro-incarceration policies defund social welfare policies, women are never individually, and if they can never support themselves individually, they're never going to call out on their husbands because the alternative is being poor, and women will always choose to be with their abusive husbands and be poor. This is why you should vote for government, increasing independence for women and preventing feminists from being misrepresented. Thank you.
Great round.
Great round, guys.
Great round.
Okay, speech, guys. I think for the other judges too, I think we'll need around a few minutes to make our decision.
Sounds good. Take your time. Thank you.
Thank you.